All right, guys, in this episode, we're going to cover some tools that I have used, many of them for years, to help with really hard to reach bolts. It's really important to be able to have some tools for that. We've all had that experience where you just have to take your open-end wrench and turn it a 1/16th of a turn, flip the wrench a 1/16th of a turn, flip it a 1/16th of a turn, and just keep going on and on like that. That's great if you're a weekend warrior and you got all weekend to play with one bolt. Most of us don't have time for that, and professionals definitely don't, because you're going to lose money bad if you're going to do that practice. So we're going to show you some things that'll help you to speed up your work. When you've got a bolt, you can see it, but you just can't get to it. Your only thing you would normally do is remove the parts that are in the way, but with these tools, you might be able to sneak behind there and get that bolt out. One of the first and most useful tools that I got is a set of Stubby ratcheting wrenches. These are by GearWrench here. You can also get a flex head version as well. Get into really tight, small spaces with this. These are absolutely a must-have. Another must-have is a set of flex head wrenches like this. This is also GearWrench. We will put a link to all of these exact tools that I have in the description for this video. This is absolutely a must-have to get a lot of versatility. Also from GearWrench, these are really, really handy. Especially I find these are useful removing starters and alternators. This is also by GearWrench. This is an S wrench. This is part of a set like the other wrenches that I've shown. This is a particularly nice model in that it has the flippable reversing there, which is very handy. This gets you out of trouble if you find you backed the bolt up to the firewall and can't get your wrench out or something like that. These reversible ratchets like that are very handy. Many of you guys probably already have this. If you don't, you need them offset wrenches. These are extremely good, surprisingly good at getting into awkward, tight spaces. Also, if the nut is recessed and a socket is too wide, these generally can get to it. So a must-have is these offset wrenches. All right, here's a very useful thing that can save a lot of time. This is, I guess it's pronounced YiYeie, not sure where they come up with these names, but this is a thin, super thin wrench set like this. Typically, I use these on transmission pans where the transmission pan is just located right above the frame of the vehicle on one of the corners, and you can't get a ratchet in there, you can't get a wrench in there, you can't even get your offset wrench in there, but you can get these super thin wrenches between that frame and the transmission pan, and this saves you from having to loosen up the engine mounts to raise the engine. You can just get to that bolt using this thin wrench. One thing that can be particularly frustrating, a lot of times you're working in really tight spaces, especially underneath the dashboard where you're working blind and you have to reach up and you can feel with your fingertips the nut or the bolt, but it's just too tight a space to use a ratchet, too tight of a space to use a wrench, but you can just get your fingers on there. Well, there's some tools that will help if that's the situation. One tool that's really useful in that application is this set. I believe this is by Wanlvkang. I don't know if that's the pronunciation. All I know is I just set this to like a little bit of an angle. It fits comfortably in the palm of my hand. And again, I can get my fingers on the bolt. This allows me to get that with some decent torque as well. So this is really useful to have in those applications. Another useful application in the same way as the finger ratchet here. This is reversible in both directions here. These are extremely handy, but the thing with these, unlike the previous tool, you really have to have the nut or bolt loosened up a bit here. You're not going to be able to get a lot of torque with this because, again, you're just using your fingers. But once that's loosened up, this is a great way to just zip it off. Now, sometimes it's not a nut or a bolt that you are trying to get rid of. Sometimes it's a little torque screw or maybe even just a Phillips or standard head screw. And that's where this Crom extreme micro ratchet comes in. Very, very handy. It uses standard hex like that and allow you, again, you can just get your fingers on there. This tool will allow you to do the job. And finally, these are not just little cute gimmicks here. These are actually really useful. These are Knipex mini pliers here. These I typically use on those applications where you have a headlight bulb that you can reach in there and you can barely get your fingertips on that headlight bulb to change it. A lot of times you have to remove the whole front bumper of a car in order to remove the headlight to access the bulb, all because you just can't get the leverage. But you get that in your hand there, and you can just barely grab onto that bulb, spin it loose, change it in a matter of minutes without doing a whole procedure. Now, ideally, you of course want to be able to rely on your ratchet, but you've got some challenges with getting the ratchet or your socket to line up with the bolt, especially on a high torque application where you're afraid you're going to strip it. And that's where these tools are an absolute must-have. This is a set from Astro. These are wobble head sockets like this. The difference with this versus your typical universal joint like most of you guys probably have is these stay in position a lot better. They're also a lot more fluid. Once you start turning with these, they tend to stay on the bolt much better. A lot of professional mechanics actually use these as their standard sockets, just the same way you would pull a 15mm socket from your drawer. This is what a lot of professional mechanics will use just by default, whether they need the versatility or not. Now, many times you run into a very, very common problem, probably the most common problem, and that is there just isn't enough clearance for you to get your ratchet in there because it's too thick. You're up against the firewall, you're up against another part, and you're stuck using a wrench, or maybe if you're lucky, a ratcheting wrench. But that's where a set like this comes in. So we've got a combination here. This is the thinnest low profile ratchet that I have come across. This is Premier here. Very, very, very low profile. The other thing that I like about the Premier is the flip switch here is recessed into the ratchet, so you're less likely to catch that switch and prevent you from being able to use it. Also, the button to depress for the release of your socket is also recessed into the ratchet so that you have maximum low profile. Now combine that with the Astro Tools low profile socket set, and you have a very, very low profile that will reach into the tightest spaces. Speaking about tight spaces, one of the most common challenges that people find is when they're doing a basic maintenance of replacing a serpentine belt. And you do that in a transverse engine and it is just an inch from that firewall and you can't get anything in there. Maybe if you're lucky you can get a wrench in there, but now you don't have the leverage to turn the wrench because you've just got a small wrench in there, and a long wrench just can't get the angle right, and you are just stuck. I get people out of jams all the time when they're trying to do their own serpentine belts, and they always wonder how I do it, and this is the trick. Again, this is from GearWrench. This is an amazing set here. So you can adjust the angle of your socket here to any angle you want so you can work around obstructions. This prevents the problem of just using a straight wrench and not having the swing arc available. Now you have it at any angle you want. And the best part, it has a set of pass-through sockets. So they're super, super low profile. Look how thin that is. That's going to fit even in the tightest space. You no longer have to undo the engine mounts to move the engine. Let's check it out real quick. All right, look at this extremely narrow gap we have to try to get in there with a wrench. Never going to happen. You're not going to get your hands in there, but we can snake this right in there. and get onto the tensioner pulley, look at how little room that needs. A very common thing that you will have to do a lot of times on major engine work, like timing belt or something, you've got to remove that crankshaft pulley. And on a lot of vehicles, you can't remove the crankshaft pulley without first removing the radiator, because you're never going to be able to get your impact gun, which is generally what you need to remove a crankshaft bolt. You're never getting that impact gun to fit without removing the radiator. But Astro Tools has a genius solution to that I've used all the time. This is a massive time saver. Using this Astro 1834 air ratchet with this really low profile design, you can easily get your air tool in between that crankshaft pulley and that radiator and be able to zip that bolt off, take off that pulley without having to remove the radiator. Again, time is money for most of us. This is a huge money maker. And finally, a really common issue is that you have to work around an obstruction. The bolt is just underneath some other part that you would have to remove in order to access that bolt. Well, here's one little gizmo that often can work around that. You've all seen the universal joints. This is a double universal joint. This is made by Koken, and you can get this in the 1/4 inch, 3/8, or 1/2 inch. And this little gizmo allows you to snake around obstructions with amazing dexterity. Combine your Koken universal joint with your Astro swivel socket, and you can create quite a versatile tool there that actually does a pretty amazing job. All right, a final thing that you're going to want to have is a set of Crowfoot wrenches like this. These can come in amazingly handy. I don't use them very much. One thing about these, you got to be really careful. They really can round off the bolts because of the nature of how you're torquing things. So you really want to use these sparingly. And even then, I use these sort of flare wrench type of design here that you would typically use, like if you're removing a radiator fitting or something like that. This allows more points of contact than just your open-end wrench, so that it's a lot more stable. All right, links to all of these tools are shown in the video description, and now you can be a total hero to everybody in your neighborhood as you come through and get people out of jams all the time. Or if you are a professional mechanic, you're going to be able to greatly increase your income by beating those book estimates on how long a job should take.